Alright folks, we're back with the COVID-19 2020 project, this Gravely Commercial 430 that we picked up for a steal for the condition it's in. It has the Onan MB 12 horsepower single cylinder 4-cycle engine. We didn't have spark initially. The recap here, the seller picked this up in a trade. Came with a snowplow and a mower deck. He really didn't know anything about it other than the previous owner had parked it for over a year after he bought a zero turn and was looking to clear out some space in his garage. The seller couldn't get it to spark, so we struck a deal and we've been working on trying to figure out what's going on here. Cleaned up some wiring issues up in the tower as far as getting 12 volts to the coil when the key is turned on. The thing that drew me to this tractor was that someone had taken a lot of time, possibly one of the prior owners was a machinist, or someone that had an ability to really take their time and cut and drill and make these mounting plates to install a General Motors 4-pin HEI solid state ignition conversion system here. Uses a 2-wire Hall effect sensor which is under the shroud. There's a ballast resistor under here also which is mounted near the Hall effect sensor. And then of course a 12 volt coil and the 4-pin GM HEI is tucked in behind this cover. All the connections were good. The wiring on the entire project was excellent. Good quality crimps. Thick wire, looks like 14 or 16 gauge wire used all the way through. Very well done. But the tractor would not run to save its life. At the end of part one, we had it coughing and sputtering. I have finally got it to run. However, I've been banging my head against the wall trying to figure out why the tractor won't rev up and run properly. We swapped carburetors off of parts, 430 MB engine that I had, and between that and some other experimenting, got the thing to at least start and idle, and it runs well. However, as soon as you go to accelerate and get off the low side of the carburetor and into the main jet fuel draw, it falls flat on its face. So I've been doing a lot of reading on these conversion systems. There's a couple different variations that are available in order to change one of these old solid state systems where the module has gone up and is no longer available into either the GM 4-pin HEI or a Chrysler ignition module that was found on just about anything Chrysler built from the early 70s to the early 90s. So the difference with this module versus the GM 4-pin HEI module, according to Brian Miller's website, which is an excellent source of information not just on ignition issues and principles for garden tractor engines, but everything on that website is just an excellent read. Everything that deals with actual performance of the motors, carburation issues, tuning them, but he's got a very, very good segment on ignition options and how to repower or rebuild an ignition system like this one here that has failed with the solid state module. These Chrysler modules are supposed to provide a good hot spark at all engine speeds, so the engine can idle and accelerate up to wide open throttle without suffering from any spark saturation issues from the coil. If I've read what is on Brian's page correctly, your 12 volt coil, since we're not using a typical points and condenser ignition system where the condenser acts as a charge capacitor to make sure that the coil has a good hot spark under all load conditions, these GM 4-pin HEI modules are more susceptible to having a weak spark once the engine is trying to accelerate up to operating speed because of the lack of coil saturation, where the coil, the electrical fields in the coil don't have a chance to build and collapse with the same strength that they would in a typical points and condenser system. So I'll give a little demonstration here. There were a couple things along the way that kept throwing me off. One of the first things was I was never sure I had a good battery. This battery came with the tractor. If you can look down in here, Brandon, you see it's got a sticker from July of 2012. This battery is almost 8 years old. That's about the end of the road for any 12-volt automotive battery, but I ruled that out as being an issue. One of the things that did give me a clue, I was initially trying to check timing on this to see if the timing was way off or installed incorrectly from the get-go when they put this system on, or otherwise affecting the way this tractor revved up. And what I found was that as soon as I would clamp the induction sensor for the timing light into the circuit for the spark plug, the engine would immediately begin to stumble and run rough, even at idle, where it initially had been running good. So that gave me an indication that the spark was weak enough that if you tried to borrow any of the spark strength for the purpose of running the timing light, it immediately affected the way that the engine ran. One of the other things that I did also find in my initial troubleshooting of the ignition no spark situation here was, if I took the boost pack and set it in and connected one side to ground and one side to the positive side of the coil, in addition to the battery from the front of the tractor and the rest of the tractor's ignition system, it made the tractor run slightly better, having that boost right to the positive side of the coil from an auxiliary power source. So let me show you guys what it's doing. This is a cold start. I haven't ran this in 2 or 3 days since I moved it inside here. Let's fire it up and let it idle for a minute. I'll show you how it'll rev up to about, I'm just guessing maybe 2,000, 2,500 RPM. And as soon as I touch the throttle to try and increase it, it just falls flat on its face. Then once I get it back down to a stabilized idle or high idle, I'll show you what happens when I clip the lead for the test light on, how it affects the spark and the way the tractor runs. It's just a very weak spark, and you can see as soon as I touched the test light to it, it stumbled and fell on its face. So at this point, I'm pretty confident that the GM 4-pin HEI on this is going to be the issue. I'm going to swap it out and rewire it with this Chrysler ignition module, and hopefully that'll take care of things, and this thing will be up and running and ready to go. So we'll check back for part 3.